Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We'll go ahead and just give it another minute for folks to log in and then go ahead and get started. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to the final session of our Financial Foundations Summer Series. I'm Emily Platt, Vice President of Advisor Success at Wellspire Advisors, and I'll be moderating today's conversation. Before we dive into the content, just a quick note for those of you who may be new and haven't joined us for our previous sessions. Wellspire is an independent fiduciary wealth management firm with over 20 offices across the country, managing more than 30 billion in assets. We typically work with high net worth and ultra high net worth individuals and families, offering planning, investment guidance, and ongoing support tailored to each client's goals. A few administrative items before we dive in. Today's session is going to be recorded, and you'll receive a follow-up email after today's session, typically in about a week with that recording. As always, the Q&A box is open, so please don't hesitate to drop questions in as they come up. We'll do our best to answer those during the Q&A portion at the end. We're excited to be joined today for a session on family wealth conversations, building bridges across generations. And we're lucky enough to have two of the very best people to guide us through this topic, our colleagues from Wellspire's Family Office Services team, Heather Flanagan and Liz Summers. It also happens to be Liz's birthday today, so I do want to take a moment to wish her a very happy birthday and thank her for spending a part of her day with us. I had asked her, I said, we could move this if you wanted, and she said, no, I love this conversation. So I do think it speaks to the work that she does and the passion that they both have for this topic. Both Heather and Liz are experienced trust and estate attorneys. So they have a lot of work in the wealth management industry, and they've spent years helping families navigate not just the technical aspect of planning, but also the meaningful conversations that are just as important. And that's really what we're here to touch on today. To kick things off, Heather, I know we said you're part of the Family Office Services team, but I don't think a lot of people know that term. So I think it could be helpful just to start there. What is Family Office Services?
So at Wellspire, we have a real commitment to all of our clients, but there is a segment of our ultra high net worth clientele that is a little bit more complex. So we've got a department that is there thinking about all of these different capabilities and services that we can help layer in to the relationship that our advisors have with their clients. And that includes trust services, wealth strategy, which Liz is a part of our wealth strategy team. That team is all ex-trust and estates or tax attorneys. They're constantly looking at the changes in laws. They're kind of updating people on things, and they talk very deeply with our clients about their estate plans and what they want to do. It's not a replacement for your trust and estates attorney at all. It's a completely different job, and it's one that we all love to do because we are having these meaningful conversations with our clients. And we're able to recognize opportunities, maybe some pitfalls, and really help them plan so that they have appropriate things in place, not just the technical things or not just the documents, but also are able to kind of prepare for conversations, which we're going to talk about today. Family Office Services also includes a lot of different things that our clients and advisors can tap into, like bill pay and accounting and family meetings and all sorts of things. So that's why we're here to help everybody out.
Thanks, Heather. I think that's a really good context to set the stage for this because a lot of what you just talked about is what we're going to be discussing today. I thought it might be helpful to start with one of the questions that comes up most frequently in our conversations with clients when it comes to communicating with your family about money and about planning, which really is, where do I start? I'd love to hear about some of the experiences you've had with best practices for families who are coming really to this conversation for the first time.
Absolutely. Yes. Well, believe it or not, you are having these conversations already, whether they're deliberate or accidental. I mean, we all communicate to our kids and our families about our own viewpoints on money. And uh, those money messages come across and they kind of lend to our biases, and it also kind of impacts our relationship with wealth generation, with jobs, with money, with a lot of decisions that we're making in our lives. And so it's important to understand where you're coming from personally, and then what you might be communicating to those people in your family. For example, in my family, my mother thought that she was saving money when she bought something on sale. My father equated money with time. So those are interesting messages, but whatever messages we've gotten and whatever messages we've given, it's never too late to be more deliberate with those messages. And we have clients who have children from, ages 0 to, over 60, where we're still working with those clients. So it's never too early, and it's really never too late to start a conversation that's more focused, more deliberate about what you actually want to pass on to your children. And so really the first step, Emily, is call your advisor. This is somebody that you trust having money conversations with. So give them a call and let them help you figure out how to navigate those things if you just don't know where to start. Oftentimes it's a reference to a book. There's a lot of books out there that are great. And in fact, a lot of our advisors at Wellspire are authors of really good financial literacy books. So we can, offer some advice on what might be age appropriate for your children. But we can even set up programs to teach kids different things at different ages. But when you get into maybe the more complex families where we've got adult children, we can help with family meetings as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, Heather, one thing you brought up in the beginning was about your own past experiences and how that can dictate how you think about money and what the future looks like. And I think it'd be helpful whether you're, first generation wealth creator, or simply just the fact that for a lot of people, their lifestyle is often much different than what they experienced at childhood. So how can you think about past experiences informing, your future planning?
That's such a great question, Emily, and that ties into so many things we love talking about here. So sometimes it can be really hard to find the vocabulary to talk about money and resources if that's something that wasn't discussed around the dinner table growing up. I know for me and my family, you're not going to talk about religion, politics, or money at the dinner table. For other families, due to, religious or cultural reasons, we don't talk about money because we don't want to be seen as materialistic, or we're worried that, we're going to come off as shallow, or we're going to teach our children that, this is where we place value. Money really isn't good or bad, obviously, but a lot of emotions get tied up into it because it represents access to resources and really to the ability to care for ourselves and move through the world with a degree of ease and comfort. So to make sure that we're giving our children sort of the right set of values, kind of guiding them towards a productive and healthy relationship with money and with resources, we really have to start, and this is the painful part, by getting very honest with ourselves. So when we're all in a room together, it doesn't matter how old your kids are. It doesn't matter how sophisticated they are. If you're in that room, you're going to be setting the tone for the conversation. They're going to be following your lead, right? So before we can all sit down together as a family and really have these meaningful conversations that are hopefully very productive, we need to figure out, how did I get my attitudes toward money? How did this develop? Let's spend some time exploring that. Sit down with your spouse, maybe open a bottle of wine. I don't want to influence you. And talk about what your lives were like growing up and how money was discussed in your household. And then maybe dig a little bit into, how did your childhood contrast with the way that you raised your children? Were there ever moments of friction between the two of you when it came to how to provide resources and what to pay for and to what extent? I would say, and I'm going to out myself as an elder millennial here, that a lot of our conversations around planning really have to do with how we want to provide with children, grandchildren, future generations. before we can do that, you know, if there are any friction points in sort of our respective viewpoints toward that topic, it can be really, really helpful to get sort of an independent third party, maybe a counselor, a coach, a therapist, to come in and offer some insights, really give us that toolbox and that ability to communicate maybe in a different way than we have been doing to date. So the other thing I do want to note, when we talk about providing for future generations, a lot of the work that we're doing in the planning space involves trust that can last for a very long time, right? So it's important that we're on that same page about how we're going to provide for our trust beneficiaries. I really think the temptation there, and I've seen this again and again with our clients, is that you think you can write a list and just say, you know, I want to pay for X, Y, and Z, and that's it, and I'm comfortable with it. We really encourage you to think sort of broader, take a step back and think in terms of values for the family. What's really key? What's really important to you? What defines your family culture? Is it education? Is it entrepreneurship? Is it, you know, we all want to provide our children with the means to purchase a home? You know, do we want to pay for a wedding? Do we want to, and this is becoming more and more common, do we want to tie distributions to a trust and access to these resources to what we think of as productive employment? You know, we're tying distributions to, you know, a certain amount that you're making. I think that's a really interesting path to go down, but I always caution when I read through documents that have that type of incentive built into the pie. I always like to see a really broad definition of what constitutes meaningful and productive employment. So I love to see, you know, being a stay-at-home parent is really important and really meaningful, and we want you to have access to resources to support you in that work. We also want to think in terms of family continuity and enabling siblings to have productive relationships and spend time together, even as their lifestyles may diverge. So the example I usually give here is, you know, you have one kid who is a cardiologist and they are fine. They are set. And you have one kid who's engaged in work that's really societally beneficial, but not necessarily as remunerative. So maybe we have a social worker, someone who works for a church, a park ranger. But we want to enable both kids to go on the same family vacations every year. And we want everyone to be able to afford a home in a safe neighborhood with a good school district. We can build all of those things into the plan, but to do that, we have to understand what's important to you first, and you have to spend some time talking about it.
Thanks, Liz. I really like the importance on values, right? And I know we were talking about it. It's not just a document that defines what is the trust, it goes beyond that in saying what matters to me, and I can dictate that, and I can be thoughtful about what matters to me and my family, and what does it look like in the future. And all of that can be part of this process. And it is really looking holistically at what are my values and what do I want for my family into the future. As you go through that process, you know, and we do that deep discovery, we're going to have more information about what our values and what actually guides that planning. What comes next? So once I know what matters to me and my family, what do I do from there?
Well, there's usually some triggering event when by the time they come to us, and a lot of our families will come to us with the need for a family meeting before. Not quite as proactive, but it's great to be proactive as well. You know, we want to really figure out what the agenda is going to be. So once we've got those values in place, we can start to talk about the stories that we want to communicate. What is it that we want to get across to whoever is going to be invited to that meeting? And another big item is deciding who's going to be part of that meeting. So is it just the small core family? Is it going to be multiple generations at this family meeting? What are we trying to communicate and to whom? And if we are communicating certain things, you know, if it is a large family meeting, we're talking about wealth transfer, and we've kind of opening everything up and talking about, you know, time, maybe there's multiple trusts involved. We've got maybe adult children who have spouses, and I always encourage people to think about including those in-laws, because Otherwise, they become outlaws and they feel like they're not part of the family. And you really want them as part of the conversation and they want and to be included. It's really surprising to me how much angst a lot of people have about this before they've actually had a formal family meeting. They're worried about ruining their kids. They don't want to kind of start these conversations too early. They feel uncomfortable about it. You know, spend the time with your advisor and with your team putting that agenda together and thinking about what you want to communicate. Think about who you're going to invite and then go through it, kind of practice it. Oftentimes, we'll not only help with the agenda, but we'll help draft an invitation letter for the family that talks about some of these family values and why it's important and why they're inviting people to this family meeting. Oftentimes, when it's done that way and it's set up that way, I've found at a lot of these meetings how surprised the host family members are at how the family reacts to it. There's a lot of gratitude oftentimes. Sometimes there's questions, and there are things that the family didn't even know that was a long time question. I've been holding on to this question forever, and I'm glad I get to talk about it now. So it really is wonderful. I think for even families who feel that they're very close or that they've done a good job, in the absence of deliberate communication, people do sometimes come up with things that were never intended to be communicated to them, or they come up with their own story, or they answer their own questions. So it's great for a family to come together and be able to have these conversations in a facilitated way, because you have that person who can kind of, you know, lower the temperature, can help keep people on track, make sure that the agenda that we've set out is continuing to happen, not force it if it's productive to go in another direction, but to kind of help that family make sure that the meeting is productive.
I appreciate that, Heather. And I think one thing you touched on there was communication and the importance of communication. And I know one thing that we've all seen, and as advisors we see often, is parents coming to us and saying, when do I have this conversation with my children? Is it too early? I want to be conscious of if I have, significant means, I don't want them then not being as motivated or wanting to, rely on our family's money, or, it's just, how do I know when's the right time? And then what should I say to my kids?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great question, and I'm going to piggyback a lot of Heather's points here because you may have guessed this by now, but we love a family meeting here in Family Office Services. I'm going to reveal some bias in that I think sort of the best place to start, maybe with an initial family meeting as a topic, and there's a whole universe of potential topics, really is that estate and wealth transfer planning piece. Estate planning is really kind of the hub of the wheel. There are so many things that come off of it. We've got philanthropy, family dynamics, business succession, really all of the bits and pieces. So keeping that in mind, as part of the estate planning process, you're probably working with your advisor, and one of the things that you're doing is putting together a balance sheet. And that's really important for people like me. So we can do a projection of your estate tax. We can make sure that everything's titled correctly. We can spend some time there. But I don't want you to feel that you have to lead with asset values in this conversation. That's really important. It really depends on the culture of your family and what you feel comfortable with. Some families are like, yeah, lay it out there. Some are like, whoa, not quite yet. And our goal with these is that this becomes part of a regular cadence. This is part of your family culture. This is something you're doing once or twice a year. It's just part of the landscape and background of your family. So it's not new or scary. And once we've kind of established that rhythm, maybe we can start to trickle more information out. But as part of this initial meeting, what we might want to think about is structuring that conversation not in terms of the balance sheet and the assets, but in terms of the planning you've done to provide for your kids and grandkids going forward, how you're going to, how this planning will affect their lives into the future, and what their roles and responsibilities are vis-a-vis any sort of trust planning that you're doing. Really, what does it mean to be a trust beneficiary? What does it mean to be a trustee? I think this is, again, I'm not to insert myself, but this is a really good opportunity to have someone like me or my colleagues, Khadidra and Rich, join the conversation because we tend to specialize in what I refer to as estate planning to English, right? So we can take these really big, complex documents that are sometimes, 40, 50, 60 pages long and break them down into something that makes sense, that's targeted to what is actually useful to you to know. You don't need to know what, Article X, Section J, Part 3 necessarily means off the top of your head. That's why you have me. That's why you have your attorney. But it is important to know what your rights and responsibilities are as a trust beneficiary and potentially as a trustee. So phrasing it in that way and potentially coupling that with a nice flow chart. Some of us are visual learners. We do a lot of that here in FOS. That can be really impactful. So I would say, once you've had the opportunity to sit down, to walk through this together, to make sure that people understand, to answer questions as they arise along the way, I would really end by asking some open-ended questions. And you might find, discover some things that you didn't anticipate whatsoever in terms of things that are concerns or pain points for your kids, things they're worried about, for you or for their kids that they're curious about. And I think that's a really great opportunity to get to know them better and to really deepen that relationship and the communication. That said, one final little thing is these meetings, we plan, we put time into them, we set an agenda, we try to stick to that agenda because we can't build Rome in a day, right? But sometimes, moments of friction or, sore spots might arise. We don't know what's going to come up over the course of the meeting. And I would encourage you to give yourself permission to take some space if one of those moments comes up and say, let me take that back. Let me really give this some thought because I want to be, very thoughtful in how I respond to you. Can I reach out in a couple days and then follow up and do it? That builds trust. But you don't have to do everything, off the cuff. You can give yourself some room. So I would just say, that is permission from me to you to take a step back.
Thanks, Liz. One thing that you keep talking about here is a plan and the importance of a plan. And that's a lot of what we've talked about so far. One thing that I think is also important to touch on is what happens if tragedy strikes and what the benefits of having that plan in place can do. And I know, Heather, I was sharing with you that this has been something that we've seen with a client who unfortunately lost both parents and was not sure where to go next, didn't know where the documents were, did not know the attorneys, had no idea where anything was. And so it was a lot of scrambling in a time of great tragedy to then have to figure out, what do I do next? But I also think we get this question a lot just for peace of mind from parents and saying, something were to happen to me, how do I make sure that my kids feel set up to know where to go? So what's your recommendation on a plan that can make people feel more secure if anything were to happen?
Yeah, so we touched on a lot of family meetings, family conversations, discussions about family values. These are all really important things. But other things that families can meet on are, for lack of a better term, a fire drill, right? If someone in the family faces tragedy unexpectedly, we as a family want to be prepared to deal with that. And we need to know where things are and what to do. And this, really all of the advice that we've been talking about today, it can really apply to any asset level. Liz and I deal with a lot of ultra high net worth families. So these kind of fire drills are really important for them because maybe they have additional things they need to think about. Maybe they are in the public eye and they have to have a whole communications plan in place. But even for, simple families, it's important for people to know who's in charge. Is there a trust? Is there a will? Where is it? What's the combination to the safe in the family home? Who do I call? What's the name and number of the attorney that did these things? Who's the trustee? So these are simple things that people can even do on their own. They can talk to their financial advisor. Your financial advisor has a lot of resources at their disposal. So again, don't just have these conversations about what's happening in the markets. Those are really important. But it's also important to have these additional conversations with your financial advisor because they do have access to so many resources and they can really help get you started. They can help talk you through things. They can help you think of things that you might not be thinking. There's all sorts of interesting things that we've seen with our clients. For example, if they've got collections, you know, is there an inventory of them? Are they insured? You know, these are all little things that you can tick and tie while you have the time to do it. And you can make sure that there is a nice binder or there's a website that you're going to, where, whatever, but whoever's going to need to step in and get something done right away, you need to communicate to those people where all the key documents and where all the key stakeholders are.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. I think that's so important just to have peace of mind, to know that these conversations, they're so helpful in just knowing that your family has direction. They understand your values. They know where to go. It can open up conversations to have better understanding between the family members, but then to also know each other's priorities and also feel comfortable that if anything were to happen, you all have, that safety net of that plan. And so I really appreciate all this context. I do want to switch gears ever so slightly because a question that we got actually in a couple of the earlier sessions was around charitable planning. And we've had a lot of questions around charitable planning. And I know, Liz, you have a lot of knowledge on this topic as well. So I'd love to understand how charitable planning kind of ties into generational wealth transfer and planning.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love philanthropy. It's one of my favorite topics, and it's a fun one, right? Um, so there are a number of reasons, that we engage in philanthropic planning, whether that's sort of legacy building for the family, whether that's tax efficiency, whether that's, the feel good that we get when we do it, usually some combination of the three. And it really is a great topic for a potential follow-up family meeting because it's one of those things that everyone can get excited about really in their own way and bring their own, background and experience and take to, which, those topics are rare, frankly. So there are a number of ways that you can structure your charitable planning and talking about that, you'd have to give me another like 2 hours. But in very brief, two very common ones that we see quite a bit are private foundations and donor advised funds, um, abbreviated often to DAF. I have the horrible estate planning attorney habit of turning everything into an acronym, but DAFs have become incredibly popular over the past 10 years or so, and it's pretty easy to see why. In a lot of senses, they're kind of the easy button when it comes to charitable giving. So for those who are not already immersed in DAF world, you can work with your advisor to set up an account. The account itself is tax exempt, effectively treated as a public charity. Any contributions you make to that account, you'll receive a charitable income tax deduction, just like you would if you had made the same contribution to a museum or your alma mater. And then you can grant out of that account over time, make what are known as grant recommendations to public charities. So in addition to like the really low, sort of effectively no overhead, very few hurdles to set up, low cost of administration, you can make anonymous contributions from a DAF if that's something that's of interest to you, anonymous grants rather. And you don't have to file a separate tax return. You don't have to make a certain percentage distribution each year. They're really very easy. And because of this simplicity and ease, they've become, again, very popular. By contrast, private foundations are a little bit more complex. We're touching on significantly more investment and oversight at that point. We're getting our attorneys involved, but they can really still be a great fit for families who are very interested in sort of a legacy vehicle in their community. So again, much more complexity involved there, but there are also some advantages that we don't have with a DAF. So you can make broader grants, including potentially scholarships, if that's something that's of interest. And one thing that's really, very key for some of our clients is that you can actually hire family members to work for the foundation and to help run it. Again, and I stress and underline this all in caps, they have to be fair market value salaries for the expertise and the actual work provided. But it is an opportunity to really create a profession in the family giving for a family member, which is really incredible. Regardless of what type of vehicle you choose and what venue you pursue, it's a great opportunity to bring the family together around a really positive project. And it's something that's accessible to all ages. So, one of those opportunities to bring in our younger kids as well. One of the things that we see families do pretty frequently is say, we're all getting together at the holidays. Before we meet, each grandkid is going to research a cause that's close to their heart, research a charitable organization, and present to everyone, after Thanksgiving dinner and say, this is why we need to make a grant out of the DAF to this. It's a really great exercise in sort of value discovery across the family as a whole. And it really gives us an opportunity to identify areas of shared interest. So we are very, very big on philanthropy here.
Thanks, Liz. Our last question before we open it up for Q&A. So feel free to start adding your questions to the Q&A box. I know we have some great ones that already came in. But Heather, one of the last questions I want to ask you, because I know it's work that you do often, is working with second, third generation families. And so I'm curious, what are some ways to connect the next generation with wealth that may have been created 2 or more generations in the past?
Yeah. Well, again, a lot of this centers on family values, and those values, I think, are easy to communicate through stories. And so it's really nice to have those family histories. There's all different types of things that we've done with families to kind of capture that, and each family is a little bit different. Some families will organize a field trip to where people grew up or where they had their first jobs or where the family had its first business and what it looked like. And they can incorporate photographs and meaningful activities during these field trips. Those can be a lot of fun when you're thinking of, especially, some of these younger generations, younger people, to actually make it feel tangible, it's like show and tell, right? So it can get them very excited. It can get them very proud of things that their family has done. Sometimes when we do research into the history of how our some very long-term 6, 7, 8 generation families, you find out things that maybe aren't so, things that you can be proud of, but that's something to talk about as well. And I've seen families where maybe the family wealth was at the time made in a way that was appropriate, but maybe by today's standards, there's some questions about it. And I've seen families take that information and actually turn it around through philanthropy, through communication, and be very successful at that and kind of change that family narrative. So it can be empowering as well. So there's all different types of things. I mean, I've seen some families who get together and they say, we want to preserve our family history. And, for each family member, they take a little piece of it. And maybe one grandchild is interviewing several family members, and maybe another one is doing some video of different folks. Maybe some is kind of organizing the family photo albums, and they kind of bring it all together, and they have this shared experience of discovering their family in a new way, understanding what those stories and those values are, and then feeling empowered to kind of add to that history for their family.
Thanks, Heather. We'll go ahead and open it up to questions because I know we have a lot that have already come in and very good questions. So I'm going to start at the top with, are there any particular tips in having these conversations about financial planning and lifestyles with one's daughter who lived comfortably and her spouse who comes from far less means and whose family didn't talk frankly about finances?
You want to start, Liz, or?
Sure. And please jump in. These are great questions already.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in that particular situation, we want to be thoughtful when we're conveying information to our daughter about our plans for her. I think that might be a situation where you might want to bring your daughter in first and just say, we really want to be sensitive to your husband. We want to think through this together and make him feel like he's part of the family, like he's included in this, but not overwhelmed. And as part of that, not to head back on an old standby, But that might be a situation where it might be helpful, to have a family counselor involved to help us talk about kind of the differences in the ways that we grew up and where we came from and where we're going.
One question that came in is the pink elephant in the room, which I think is a fair point, and it's the fact that we're talking about what happens to the money that implies that we're dead or at least disabled, that something tragic happens to us. And often the reluctance is about acknowledging that fact and not about the money directly. And I can personally say that this is a conversation I had with my brother this week, who was struggling having this conversation.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't want to imply that I'm dying. And I can understand that, right? He's like, I don't know if I want to have this conversation. And it is a tricky one to have because you are having to think about what happens if something tragic happens to me. Not necessarily about how much money he has, more about, the human aspect of it.
I think, Emily, that oftentimes is maybe the focus when you're doing your estate plan, right? Because you're thinking about, okay, when I die, where's the money going to go, or who's going to take care of my children? But I think when you are having these family conversations, they can focus on other things. It's more about empowering your loved ones with information that's important for them. And it's more of a life discussion about how we're living our lives now, how we're communicating, how we're enjoying it, the values that we want to pass on, the stories that we want to tell. And I think that can be more of a fun conversation, more empowering. And of course, part of the conversation is the estate plan and what ultimately is going to happen. But I think a lot of people during these family conversations are focused on what they can do today, even. So some of it is about, well, I wasn't planning on giving large gifts to my kids during my lifetime, but I just found out at this meeting that my son wants to start a business. He has a whole business plan in place. I think it's a great idea. Maybe I'm going to invest in that business, right? So all sorts of interesting things come out during family meetings. Some families discover that they have a philanthropic focus and passion around a particular cause that they didn't all know that they had. And so they think about, well, we don't have a donor advised fund in place. Maybe we should set one up, and maybe we should plan and get together on a regular basis so that we can talk about how we want to fund these various causes around a particular area of philanthropy. So I think you can make these conversations not just about death, and you can it's really more about empowerment and spending time with your family.
To piggyback off of that, Heather, I completely agree. I had a client once who every time she tried to share with her daughter what her estate plan was like on the phone, she'd call her and she wanted to walk through it with her because it was important to her, that she knew that she was provided for. And every single time the daughter would hang up because she's like, I don't want to know, you're never going to die. And it was so, so sweet. But at the same time, we came to a point with the daughter where we're like, when you're ready to talk about this, here's your team who stands behind me and they know everything and they're ready to go and they're ready to support you. But in the meantime, let's focus on all the things you just mentioned, Heather. Lifetime giving, family history, spending that quality time together. For them, they volunteered together, really making sure that, the time that they had was so meaningful. So I love that.
I think those are beautiful answers. The next question that came in is regarding how to prepare a document about what is where. So how we were talking about the importance of having that plan. She said she drafted her own template. Do you have any templates that may be useful? I'll suggest that if you Google family love letter, that's typically what I find has the best results. So there are a couple PDFs on Google. If you type in family love letter, that will provide you some really good templates that you can just print out and write everything in there. I don't know if Heather or Liz, I know you have specific documents that you create for your clients as well. But typically I think just by Googling it, there's some great options online.
Even apps that you can use. So you can, yeah. It's a nice way in being able to share. Some families will set up their own dashboard where it's kind of like a shared drive, and they can all kind of add documents or information or have a family calendar.
Mhm.
All sorts of resources. It really depends on the family and what they need, but don't let any of this seem overwhelming. I want to encourage people to just, if you have any idea, start somewhere. It's that first step, and don't try and, if you're getting hung up, don't try and do it alone. Get your financial advisor, get a family friend, get your daughter, get whomever to kind of help you with that first step. And once you kind of, and make it small, make it an easy early win, and then just keep, okay, well, we got that one done. What's the next thing that we can do on the list? So don't make it feel overwhelming. And again, people at any wealth level, these are all human, you know, issues and problems and exciting things that happen too. So anyone can do this at any level, and it will be very productive and good, because essentially it's being responsible and also empowering your family members to have more information, to be able to be more successful, and to feel more connected to you.
I
Thank
love
you.
that. I just have two tiny things to
Yeah.
add. One, to echo Heather's point throughout, reach out to your financial advisor if you're concerned about, a model or a template, or if you just want to bounce things off someone. They do this all day, every day. They're very comfortable in this space. And when I'm unsure about something, I want to go to someone who could do it in their sleep, right? Two, if you put the effort and the time into coming up with, here are my passwords, here's the trust, here is everything. That's a great exercise. And I have a lot of clients who do that, but I've had some along the way who did that and then put it in such a safe place that it was never located again. So I would ask that if you do that, you communicate it to at least two trusted people.
Very good advice, Liz. Thank you for adding that. We've had a couple questions come in about provisions to the trust. So one of them that we got is, if we're requiring one child, or this one's actually very interesting. What about requiring one child to take classes on basic financial and investment literacy before distributing or taking over the trust? Is it realistically enforceable? And have you seen anyone implement some of these requirements with success?
Heather,
I've
do you
never
want
seen
to?
that one. I mean,
I've never seen
it's a
that
good
one.
idea, but I think, the things that we've been talking about today, you can start at very early ages so that you feel comfortable that your kids have financial literacy and are going to make responsible decisions. And again, I think it's like overcoming this fear that if I talk about it or if I reveal too much, I'm going to ruin my kids. No, you love them. You're going to be empowering them with additional information so that they can be smart enough to make good decisions on their own. And you have to be okay that if you give money away,
Yes.
it is now theirs. And once they decide what they're going to do with it, sometimes people make mistakes, and it's okay. They can learn from those mistakes. You can talk about them in a productive way. And so I think sometimes control and too much control that's put into these documents, especially the legal documents, maybe not always a great idea. Some control is important if we're concerned about, somebody coming into a large inheritance too early, things like that. Those are simple, easy provisions that are generally put in estate planning documents. But I think some of these more personal things are better put in a letter of wishes, which is not legally binding, but it is very informative and very important to set out for a lot of families, and it can have a lot of those type of directions. And one other thing I would encourage people to do if they're going to put a letter of wishes in place is to maybe also think about writing love, like Liz said, a love letter to your family members. And it can be when your kids are 10 and you write this letter to them about how much you love them and the things that you remember. Those are the things that when they pull that out of the family safe at the end, they're going to be spending more time with that than they are with the estate planning documents.
We have had, and I will say, we have had clients come to us and say, I'm really concerned they're going to get their trust soon. And I'm concerned that my kids don't know enough about investment management and financial planning. And I'm concerned they won't know what to do with this money or how to manage it. And so we will have meetings with those kids. I know we've talked a lot about family conversations, but we'll also have one-on-one financial literacy sessions with these children before they get their trust to say, let's talk about what is an ETF and a mutual fund. Why do we invest for the long term? What is compounding interest? And why is it so important to stay invested in the markets? And so those are, there are ways to say to your children, before you get this trust, it's important that you take these, or we want you to take these classes so you can do it without having provisions. And we do have a lot of clients that ask us to do that. And I think it gives them the understanding and that around how this money actually works and why we want to, be so thoughtful around how we're investing it. But it is something we absolutely do with clients.
And one more thing I would add there, and this is something I talk to a lot of my clients about, is if you kind of want to see how your kids will behave as trust beneficiaries, the best way to do that if you have a larger estate is to think about making some lifetime gifts in trust so you can see how they interact with those funds while you're still here. That way, you put X into this trust. If they do great with it, if they're excellent, beneficiaries, if they're responsible with their distributions, if they act exactly the way you would like when they become trustee or co-trustee at a certain age, you can feel more confident about leaving them more when you do pass away. By contrast, if you have a child who takes all of their distribution and flies immediately to Vegas, that can inform the rest of your planning. So I like to think of that sort of lifetime giving as almost kind of training wheels for your overall estate plan. Just my 2 cents.
Yeah, it's really helpful. A question, kind of building on this a little bit more, where you brought up the scenario about having, the cardiologist and the social worker. The needs are obviously different. How do you have distributions or trusts that are not equal or avoid conflict between siblings? Is that possible?
So I think communication is really, really key here, as it always is. I think if you sit down and you talk to both your children and say, your sibling is a social worker and we want them to have access to resources the way you do, that is probably going to be received pretty well. But if you wait until you're gone and there's no one to present that message, it's going to go really poorly. It's going to end up as mom liked you more than me, which is not the case at all. So we can build into the trust agreement a couple of different ways to make differing allocations among our children. One that I will beat the drum about till the end of my days is powers of appointment can be really, really helpful here, especially if, with most of our plans, everything goes to the surviving spouse. Surviving spouse might be with us another 20, 30 years past when we lose our first spouse. Situation with the kids and grandkids might be entirely different. So if we include powers of appointment in trust for the survivor, that gives them the ability to redirect some of those trust assets closer in time to when they would pass to the next generation and say, I still want it to go to my kids, but maybe 80% to kid A, who's our social worker, and 20% to kid B, who's our cardiologist, just so they know I wanted them to have something from me. But we know it's not as necessary lifestyle-wise. Heather?
I think you have to think long term too about some of these things. So maybe you want to allow that cardiologist to, retire and become a yoga instructor or, whatever it is. So sometimes like people will set up like a common pot trust. There's all different types. You can talk to your estate planner, you can talk to us. And a lot of, again, the benefit of having a wealth strategist on your team is these are folks who have drafted documents for years of their career. They've seen things that work, things that don't work so well, and they can talk you through it so that you're really informed when you go back to your estate planning attorney and you know what additional documentation you want or how you might want to change your current estate plan.
Cool. I like this next question because I think it gets to the point that all families are different. And so they asked, do you have any guidance on how to think about late arriving stepchildren in estate planning?
Oh, that's wonderful. First of all, I'm glad you're thinking about them. I think, there are a number of ways to address that. Heather, do you have any thoughts here?
Yeah, there's a number of things. And again, a variety of things that you can do. You could, if, for example, you're giving um, maybe annual gifts to all of your kids, maybe you include them in those current annual gifts that you're giving out. You can, I mean, whoever is part of your estate, you may want to sit down and kind of think about it. How do we want to be thoughtful about this? You can always change your estate planning documents at any time until you pass away. And even then, you can put little provisions in that people can make little tweaks along the way. But again, that's maybe where a letter of wishes comes in. And maybe that relationship's developing over time. I love lifetime gifts. I love giving money to people during your lifetime because they appreciate it. And you can also communicate what it is that, I love you. This is an I love you gift, or this is a gift that I'm really hoping that you guys will use to go on a family vacation, because I know that that's something that you guys have been trying to save up for, but maybe haven't gone on, and I want to help you do that. I think when you're giving during your lifetime, you can kind of help people, and you can have conversations with them, and they can feel that impact right away. And so I think for some folks that are coming into a family later in the family, it's important to include them, but think about it thoughtfully and maybe start with some of these outright gifts right away. And then, you can always talk to your kids, and maybe they're not adults or maybe they're younger, but if they're younger, you can write out a letter and saying what your thought process was, because they might think, well, I'm the original kid, right? Like I should be treated differently, but maybe that's not the parents' thought. Maybe they feel strongly that all children in the family should be treated equally. It's no judgment by your financial advisor or any of us. We're here to kind of talk through those ideas and thoughts with you and come to something that really works for you and your family.
We have a couple more questions. I'm going to try and squeeze some more in before the end of this call. But the next one we've brought up a little bit, but I'd love just to expand on it, is what's the appropriate age of children to learn about the family's assets?
That's a good question. I think if we start with more general financial literacy skills, even for kids who are in like elementary school, one of my favorite exercises is really save, spend, share. So sitting down and saying, if I gave you $100, what do we want to spend it on? What do we want to put in a savings account? What do we want to give to someone as a gift? Or what do we want to give to charity? And kind of setting up that framing really early. So that's just part of how we think about money. It is in these separate buckets. We are geared towards helping others. We are also geared towards saving. It's not just spending everything. I think that kind of sets the table, because kids, a lot of our clients think, well, oh, the kids have no idea what we have. They know. They usually have an idea. We're all very perceptive. We see how our friends live and our neighbors live and our classmates. We get an idea of where we are. So I think having that conversation where we're focused more on our approach to the money as opposed to specific assets from an early age is a good first step. And then maybe, as kids get older and we start making perhaps smaller outright gifts to them that they can manage on their own, that's a good first step as well. Heather, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good place to start, Liz. Absolutely. I mean, with technology and all the information out there, kids younger and younger are finding things out, and they can find things out, and their friends might be telling them stuff. So that's, again, why I think even in today's age, it's more important that we're communicating with our kids and we're making sure that they're getting the messages from us and not from the newspaper or their friends or whomever that might not be getting it right. So having those early conversations and opening the door to letting your kids know that they can ask you those questions and that you will give them a thoughtful answer doesn't mean you need to give them line item in the financial statement, but I do think it's important to spend some time. And I think also Liz made a very good point earlier on. It's like if you get caught off guard by a question, say, I need some time to kind of think about that. And I really want to give you a good answer. I'll come back later. And, maybe you do research, maybe you talk to somebody, maybe you sleep on it and come back with a thoughtful answer.
I think a phrase that I use a lot is we don't need radical transparency, we need responsible transparency that's age appropriate.
On the radical transparency and just on transparency in general, this is a question we do get pretty often. So I want to kind of end with this one. They ask about comments on the pros and cons of revealing to everyone exactly what benefit each beneficiary will receive, who gets what when. If you let them know in advance, are there benefits to that?
I will start. I'm a person who values transparency. Like I said, if you're less transparent, kids are gonna fill, or family members, whether they're children or not, are gonna fill in information on their own. And oftentimes, even in the closest families where there's siblings that are very close, they think that one is treated better than another one, right?
Yeah.
So it's important to sit down and have these conversations about what your values are, what you're trying to accomplish, why you're setting up distributions the way that you are. And I think sometimes parents get too into thinking like I have to make everything equal. Well, you can't. Each one of your kids is probably a different age. They're having different things happening in their lives. And so you need to tell your children, I need to have a little flexibility in how I'm dealing with things as they go along. And I love you all. We're going to be here. We're going to support, whatever we think is important in supporting. Maybe we're not supporting your every whim and desire, but maybe you're going to have to provide for some of that on your own. And maybe we can help you learn how to do that. But, you might start a business for one kid, help start a business for one kid where you're investing in that business, and maybe another kid you are giving a little bit more money to on a regular basis because they've got more children, or they've got, you're putting money away in their kids' 529 plans and the other sibling doesn't have any children yet. So I think you can explain to your children why they might be treated differently at different periods of time, but that you're there and they can ask questions, and that it's not that you love somebody more than the other. If you're giving somebody a gift this year and you give somebody else a different gift the next year, it's not about the measurement of love. I think you can have those conversations when you are more transparent with your kids.
I love that. And I completely agree. I think, we're all rational animals at the end of the day, even if it doesn't feel like it all the time. And if you sit down and you explain why, what your reasoning was, you put it in a letter, you have a conversation, that's going to land a lot better than that void, that absence of information. Because when we don't have any communication there, our minds are going to fill it in, and typically in a pretty negative way. So if you are going to share, with the children what what they might be receiving, I think it's good to explain your reasoning as part of that process.
That's great. Thank you both so much. I know we are just about out of time, so I think this is a good place to wrap up. I know we do have a few more questions that we did not get to, but we will be reaching out directly. So if you are a client, you will be hearing from your advisor if there's a question. If you were anonymous, we're going to try and put the responses to some of these questions in our follow-up email that will include the recording. And it is important to know if you are a Wellspire client and want to explore any of these topics today in further detail, or want to have a family conversation, your advisor would be happy to connect with you and do this. And if you're not yet working with Wellspire but are curious about what we do, the follow-up email will include a way to get in touch with us. Thank you so much for joining us today. And for those of you who have been part of these events with us the whole summer, thank you for joining us for the 4 series that we had. We care deeply about financial education, and I really hope these sessions have been valuable learning opportunities for all of you. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll be sending out plenty of follow-up information, and hopefully we'll have more financial foundation series moving into next year as well. Thank you again to Liz and Heather.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.